Hi everyone, this is Bree Luna, and today we're going to talk about the Comprehension Continuum. How do we get our intermediate students to synthesize, analyze, logically predict and infer, and critically evaluate? We know that these higher level comprehension tasks are important. However, how do you get them there? Today we'll talk about a systematic way to teach comprehension across the continuum. First, we need to start with the standards. The standards will tell us where our students should be. What comprehension tasks and assignments should they be capable of doing? Remember that these are minimum exit requirements for the end of a grade level. This is the comprehension continuum. Think of it like a scope and sequence similar to those found in other components of reading. The skills are listed from simple to complex. In order for a student to be capable of advanced comprehension and analysis, they must have proficiency in the skills that precede it. At the most basic level, we call it literal comprehension. In early stages of reading development, students focus on literal comprehension. They need to understand the basic facts and details presented in the text. Then, we can work on inferential comprehension. As students progress, they can begin to make inferences based on their schema and information presented in the text. They can draw conclusions that aren't explicitly stated. This is where third grade standards live. Then we move on to evaluative comprehension. Students then develop the ability to evaluate the text critically. They form questions about the text and can judge its quality or position. Next is synthesizing information. As students become more advanced readers, they learn to synthesize information from multiple sources or parts of a text to create cohesive understanding. Fourth and fifth grade standards are full of evaluative and synthesizing comprehension skills. Then we move on to critical and analytical thinking. In advanced education levels, students need to think critically and analytically about complex text and concepts. And finally, at the highest level of comprehension, students can apply what they have learned from their reading to real-life situations, problem solving, and decision making. So, how do we use this to systematically teach comprehension? Let's take a look at a couple examples. We always want to start with the standards. These are the English Language Arts standards for literature or fiction. Our end goal is we want students to analyze different text to draw conclusions. So looking at the fourth and fifth grade standards, take a look at how students are expected to do this. In fourth grade, we need students to explicitly draw inferences from the text. We also want them to describe in depth a character, setting, or event, drawing on specific details in the text. There's our text evidence that we keep coming back to. In fifth grade, we now want students to compare and contrast two or more characters, settings, or events, and draw on text. So now they're still having text evidence, but we want to compare and contrast two characters. We can also look at 5.9, which is compare and contrast stories in the same genre. And we want them to think about similar themes and topics. If our end goal is to get students to analyze different texts to draw conclusions, let's take a look at the sub-skills that are needed. First, we know that students must be able to accurately and fluently decode the text. They also must be able to attach meaning to 90% or more of the words, or comprehension will break down. We need them to be able to ask questions and make connections about the text that they read. We need them to capture the main ideas and the details. We need them to be able to not only analyze the text, but also offer their background knowledge or schema to make inferences. We need them to be able to find and analyze provided evidence. And we need them to connect different ideas. All of those sub-skills must be intact in order for our goal to be reached. Here is is a question you might see on a standard-based assessment in 4th or 5th grade. Let's break it down. Read the following passages from 2 of Roald Dahl's fantasy novels. In the BFG and Matilda, both Sophie and Matilda feel neglected, misunderstood, and lonely. Their childhoods are not exactly the same, but what experiences have they both had that would make them feel this way? So if a student is tasked with this question, the first thing they would have to do is be able to read both of those passages. Let's take a look at the next step. The first thing we need to do is look at what sub-skills or background knowledge our students might need in order to complete the task. So for this question, we need to know that our students can read at a Lexile level of 840 for Matilda and 720 for the BFG. So this is going to make me as a teacher know that any student that's not reading at or above grade level is going to need support accessing this question. I also need to think of the students that might not know the meaning of the following words: doting, scab, ordinary, extraordinary, sensitive, brilliant, obvious, bingo, orphan, orphanage, horrid, dread. If they don't know those words, then their comprehension is going to suffer. I need my students to make connections as they're reading and think about their own experience and other things that are happening in the world. The more questions that they ask while they're reading, the better their comprehension is. I also need them to be able to capture the main idea or the gist of the paragraph. So after reading both individual paragraphs, I need my students to be able to know that the main idea of these 2 paragraphs are: neither Matilda nor Sophie have loving, caring parents who take good care of them. And then the next step is for them to not only capture the main idea, but to use their own schema or their own background knowledge to make an inference. So the inference is Sophie and Matilda feel lonely, neglected, and misunderstood because the adults in their lives are not loving and caring. We expect caregivers to love and take care of their children. So an inference is the text support and also my own background knowledge. Let's keep going. The next sub-skill is analyze provided evidence. So both of those paragraphs provided me with several examples of how Matilda and Sophie were unloved or neglected. So as a student, I need to be able to identify and pick out that evidence. Finally, I need to be able to compare and contrast or connect different characters and different ideas. So although Sophie was an orphan and Matilda had a family, both girls had dismal childhoods. All of those sub-skills are necessary before I begin the actual analysis of the question. I think you'll agree that many students don't even know where to begin. So by giving them a systematic way to tackle a question is super helpful. So I help my kids to dissect the question to determine what their mission is. They need to ask themselves, what am I asked to do? So they can find what they're asked to do by looking for action or direction words. So I need to read both passages. I need to find text support because it's asking me what experiences or examples or proof there is. And I need to write a paragraph that shows the proof I found. If you format this in a mission as a task, their task as a mission, it's hugely helpful. So here is our final response. Although Sophie is an orphan and Matilda has a family, both characters feel neglected, misunderstood, and lonely. Sophie's parents died when she was a baby, so she lives in the village orphanage. She knows no one even worries about her. She hates it and is punished every time she makes a mistake. Sophie thinks her situation is horrid and looks forward to leaving as soon as she can. On the other hand, Matilda has a family, but they do not love her. In fact, they treat her like a scab and can't wait to get rid of her. They neglect her and even left her home alone when she was just 3 years old. It makes sense that these girls feel neglected and lonely. The adults in their lives who should be caring for and loving them are not. So notice that in my response, I have done several of the sub-skills. So first, I opened up with just repeating the question to make sure that my reader knows that I am answering the question. I'm then finding lots of text evidence, and I'm also making an inference while comparing and contrasting the two girls' experiences. Now let's take a look at an example from an informational text or nonfiction. In third, fourth, and fifth grade, key ideas and details are important in the standards. Our end goal is inference based on evidence. Let's take a look at how these play out with real text. As you can see, our end goal is inference based on evidence. But in order to do that, the sub-skills that I have to have are capture the main idea, ask questions and make connections, retell and sequencing, direct recall, and attaching meaning when I read accurately and fluently. You can see that the third grade standards are capturing the main idea and asking questions and making connections. Here's our next comprehension task. Read the passage. Why is the American Civil War sometimes called the Brothers' War? Why was it a challenging and tragic time for the families that found themselves on different sides of the war? Write one paragraph using support from the text to answer these questions. The American Civil War is sometimes referred to as the Brothers' War because it highlights the tragic fact that it pitted Americans against each other. Often people within the same families were divided by issues of slavery and states' rights. Families from border states like Kentucky and Missouri were often torn and divided as they found themselves on either side of the conflict. Brothers, fathers, and sons frequently fought on opposing sides, and sometimes they even found themselves on the same battlefield. The term Brothers' War demonstrates how a conflict within one country rather than a foreign invasion or external threat, can be even more challenging and devastating. Let's take a look at what sub-skills and background knowledge are needed for this task. First, the Lexile level of this passage is 1210 to 1400. That is a solid 5th grade reading level. So anyone not reading on grade level is going to need support accessing this text. I also know that the word tragic, conflict, opposing, border, foreign, and devastating plays a huge role in the comprehension of this paragraph. So students might need pre-teaching or explanation on those words. My first question in this task is just a direct recall. It's why is the Brothers' War called that? And it's called that because family members and Americans were pitted against each other. It directly says it in the text. I also need to be able to find the main idea or the gist of the paragraph. The American Civil War was even more devastating because the battle was taking place amongst countrymen and families. And now I'm finally ready to do the comprehension task that was asked in the question. Oftentimes we need to give explicit direct instruction on some of these comprehension tasks that are very abstract. So inferences are when you take what the text is saying, or the clues from the text, and you take your own background knowledge and common sense, and you put them together to make an inference and to guess what the author wants us to know. So for this one, the text said that countrymen and family members were divided, and the text said that brothers, fathers, and sons frequently fought on opposing sides, and sometimes even on the same battle. What I know as common sense and my own background knowledge is that family members usually love each other and would not want to harm one another. I also know it would probably be much more difficult to fight a family member than to fight a complete stranger. So putting those things together, I can infer that while all war is awful, finding yourself on opposite sides of a battlefield from a family member would be challenging and tragic. Now I'm ready for the task. Read each passage. Why is the American Civil War sometimes called the Brothers' War? Why was it a challenging and tragic time for families that found themselves on different sides of the war? Write one paragraph using support from the text to answer these questions. Let's help students dissect the question to determine what their mission is. First, they're going to look for direction words or action words. I'm going to read the passage. Then I'm going to answer, why is the American Civil War called the Brothers' War? And I know that that answer is directly in the text. Then I'm going to infer why it was challenging and tragic. The author didn't really tell it to me, but based on the text and my background knowledge, I can make a pretty good guess. And finally, I'm going to write one paragraph. Mission accepted. Here is our outcome. The American Civil War is called the Brothers' War because Americans, and sometimes even family members, were divided and fighting. Many family members in border states were on opposite sides of the conflict. They even found themselves fighting against each other on bloody battlefields. While all war is awful, fighting against the friends and family you love would be even more challenging. You can see all of the sub-skills that I have in place in order to get to my final task, inference based in evidence. Here are the key takeaways. Always start with the standards. The standards are going to let you know where your students should be and what they should be capable of. Remember, these are end of the year minimum competency standards. Next, match those standards with the comprehension continuum. Where should the majority of your questioning and comprehension work take place? If a student is struggling with that, then you need to identify the sub-skills and the background knowledge they might be missing and fill those to give them support. Next, teach students how to dissect the question. Have them make a task list or a mission list so they know exactly what they're supposed to do. And finally, model, 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 practice, practice, practice. These are complex, and in order for our kids to get to be competent comprehenders, we need to give them explicit instruction.